So we're just starting the recording now. Okay, so good morning and welcome everyone. Let me just write that there. Great. So today's presentation title is called Grieving at Christmas. And I chose this image of a broken and shattered Christmas decoration because sometimes with grief and grieving at Christmas time, it can feel like everything is broken and beyond repair. Nothing is like it was, and everything about Christmas can feel painful and sharp and hard to escape or get away from. So today's short presentation will look at what grief is and what grief is not. We'll consider some of the needs that people who are mourning or grieving might have at this time of year. And we'll also look at some ideas that surround grief and Christmas in our culture and ask if maybe being a bit more flexible might be helpful. We'll ask, why is Christmas so hard when we're grieving? And what are helpful ways to deal with grief when Christmas seems to be starting earlier and earlier every year? We'll explore ways to cope with grief before, during, and after Christmas, and how this might change for you year by year. And finally, we'll look at ways you can mind yourself when you're grieving and it's Christmas time. And remember, this is a tough topic. So if you need to stop concentrating and look away during this presentation, or even stop listening and take a break, that's perfectly okay. This presentation is being recorded and you can come back to it anytime that you want. So this is a housekeeping type of slide, just really to welcome you and to repeat that this part of the presentation is being recorded. And it will be posted onto the Cancer Care West website afterwards in the webinar section so that you can rewatch it or listen to any part of it later on and look at different slides if you want to. After the presentation finishes, then the recording will be stopped and the question and answer part of today will not be recorded. And I will let you know when the recording is stopping. Some basic rules for today to remember include respecting that everyone is bringing their own experience to today. And when someone is speaking, try to listen and avoid any interruptions. Please also don't share someone else's story after this event. It's their story to tell, just like your story is your story to tell. And we also ask that we avoid trying to fix, advise, or rescue anyone else today. So as I said before, the presentation is being recorded, so you can keep your microphone on mute while this is happening. And once the presentation is over and the recording is stopped, we'll ask that you can turn your cameras on so we can see each other, but the microphone, keep that on mute unless you're speaking. And it's really okay to speak or not speak at the end. There's no pressure on that at all. And it's also okay to share or not to share. Next month in January, the topic for grief talks will be grief in the new year. Transitions can be tough. And it'll be presented by my colleague, Norma Jean. If you'd like to attend, you just register on the Cancer Care West website like you did for today. Really straightforward. And then we'll finish up for today. So this first slide looks at some ideas around what grief is and what grief is not. Grief is very messy. It can feel unpredictable, irrational. It can hit you at unexpected moments. It's certainly not linear. It's not tidy. It's not a checklist of tasks that can be done in any order or with any logic. And it can feel really mentally confusing a lot of the time. Thoughts can come and refuse to leave. Memories can appear and disappear. Worries can become really large really quickly. And grief is not about forgetting about the person we love and moving on. That phrase is not a very helpful one for grief. Grief is often experienced in very physical ways. Aches and pains, headaches, exhaustion, tension, breathlessness, digestive changes, and many more. I wonder what ways you have found your grief to be very physical. And it's not always about pushing through the tiredness. Sometimes we need to rest and recuperate and to look after ourselves physically, making sure we get enough rest. Grief can also be overwhelmingly emotional, and all the emotions can be felt really intensely and sometimes all the time, overlapping in a confusing way. Feelings like anger, sadness, regret, loneliness, hurt, guilt, happiness, joy, love, and many more feelings can hit like waves. And I wonder what kind of emotions you're familiar with in your grief. Grief can also provoke spiritual changes. Your faith can be deepened or even lost. Your beliefs can change or grow. It's not easy to understand grief, but it is an experience that all human beings will have sooner or later. Grief can involve feeling really awful some days, and sometimes those days run together for a while. Grief, however, does not mean feeling awful forever. It can change over time, and it does change over time, and that can feel strange too. It is about learning what works well for you and getting to know what helps you and what doesn't help you, and that can change from day to day, month to month, week to week. It's not about meeting everyone else's expectations or ideas about how you should or could grieve. Only you can shape your grief, no one else can. But most of all, grief is a normal and ongoing process. This happens because you love someone and that someone died. And grief is our response to that loss. It's not a time-limited task that's all done in 6 months or 1 year or 2 years. It changes over time, but there's no done-by date with grief. Alan Wolfelt has written some very useful thoughts about grief and grieving, and I really like his work. So one of his ideas is about the 6 needs of people who are mourning. The first one is to acknowledge the importance of acknowledging the reality of the death, and then to embrace the pain of loss. And again, this is not a tick list. It doesn't happen in an order or over time in a tidy way, but these are interesting ideas. He then talks about remembering the person who has died, not forgetting them, but remembering them and finding ways to connect with them. And then the task and the need to develop a new self-identity. Who am I now that this has happened to me? And this search for meaning. How do I live in this life that I find myself in now when this has happened? And our really important need to receive ongoing support from trusted others, because grief can feel so isolating and so lonely. So finding people that we can connect with and trust is really, really important in grief. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross felt very strongly about people who were dying not being listened to. She interviewed them at a time when people really weren't listening to people who were dying, and came up with some ideas around their experiences and their grief at facing their own mortality. Over time, her work was reduced to this idea of grief in stages, as if grief was tidy and predictable, like that top line. Okay, and that's out there in our culture, starting with denial and ending up with acceptance, as if it's a tick list. Now, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross profoundly disagreed with this tidy idea of the stages of grief. She knew that the reality of grief was far messier and much more unpredictable, and the bottom line is much more closer to real grief, the real experience of grief, in that everything overlaps and it's unpredictable. And this is what Kubler-Ross was actually saying. So at Christmas time, all of the expectations can really start to feel very, very heavy. So no, you don't have to deck the halls. You don't have to deck any halls. You don't even have to put up decorations if that doesn't feel helpful for you. If you actually quite like them and you want to put them up, that's great. Grief is normal and it's really hard work sometimes. And Christmas makes grief and grieving feel extra hard, extra raw, extra everything. And our culture expects Christmas to be all joyful, all happy, and all about families getting together all the time. And this happy, shiny version of Christmas that everyone must be having is almost stretching out to 3 months non-stop happiness and joy, which is a lot of pressure. All of the adverts, the songs in shops, on the radio, special foods, smells and events can act as ongoing grief triggers, leaving us feeling overwhelmed and exhausted, and pushing those grief emotions up over and over and over again. So it's really, really extra hard in the run-up to Christmas for grief and for people who are actively grieving. And it's really important to give yourself permission to grieve before, during, and after Christmas, in whatever way it shows up for you. It's okay to take breaks. It's okay to have moments of relaxing and relief. And then it's also okay to engage with your grief. Each person's loss and grief is unique. And Christmas over and over again in our culture acts as a massive grief trigger, with memories of Christmases before flooding your mind, or even a dread of wondering, how will I manage to get through Christmas Day at all? So recognizing that your loss and your grief is unique is really important. And that Christmas is a big ongoing grief trigger over several months. So days like anniversaries, birthdays, and other special occasions are very challenging. Christmas runs a series of days together, like triggers, over several months, because there's so many reminders continually. And that's what makes Christmas extra hard with grief. And if this is your very first Christmas dealing with grief, that can feel very, very overwhelming. And Julia Samuel says that significant days that were very happy in the past are often painful when we're grieving. There's a vast space where that person should be. Having a plan is extremely supportive. And within the plan, set aside time to remember the person who's died, however you might do that. Because it can feel really tempting to withdraw completely over Christmas. And sometimes it is good to spend time with yourself and by yourself. But it's also really important to spend time with other supportive people. Julia Samuel says, it helps us to spend time with other people, even if you dread it, because grief is so isolating and chilling in many ways, and it's only compounded if we're alone too much. So finding ways to dip in to company that feels manageable and giving yourself permission to go away, even if it's for short walks or to retreat to your bedroom, so that you kind of can go in and come away, go in and come away. That can be one way to help managing the grief. Here are a few ideas which may be useful to help you manage your grief at Christmas time. Take the ones that are useful and try them, and please ignore the ones that you suspect might not be useful. Just completely ignore them. So first of all, let go of any expectations of what the day should look like, of how you should feel. Just letting go of expectations can take one pressure off. It's okay to display photos of the person that you love in places that feel right for you. If you want to find or make a new ornament that helps you connect to them, that's okay. Or maybe visit a special place with a memory that you both share together. That can feel comforting for some people. Being honest with the people who care for us that Christmas is a challenge now, that can be really important. And even if people aren't able to hear you the first time, sometimes they might hear you the second time. Christmas is not an easy time for people who are grieving. If you think it would be helpful, gathering together perhaps old Christmas cards or ornaments or photographs, and you could create a special Christmas memory box just for you, for that person. And connecting with good memories. It's okay to remember good memories underneath all of the grief if you can access them sometimes. You can also make or buy a gift for someone else that you know is grieving, just to connect with them, to let them know that you know how hard this is. And if they had a favourite charity that they loved, you could donate or volunteer with that, just to connect with something that really mattered to them. You could record your Christmas memories in a journal if you find journaling helpful. And that includes the good and the bad memories, the tough bits and the nice bits. And that remember, it's okay to feel all your feelings and to show them with someone that you can trust and feel safe with. And sometimes through Christmas, it's a matter of getting it through it 1 day, 1 hour, 1 minute at a time if it's really rough. And that's the reality. But breaking down time, sometimes bringing it really tight. I just have to get through the next 15 minutes and I'll go for a walk. I just have to get through the next hour. Really pull your focus back into the here and now. This image also shows some ideas around coping with grief over Christmas, and some ways will make more sense to you than others. You could try a few and see what works best for you. And again, ignore anything that doesn't really land with you. There's no rights or wrongs. Because it's really important to remember there are no quick fixes to grief and no easy answers, and that doesn't change at Christmas time. So coping with grief at Christmas, making a plan for difficult days can feel helpful. Agreeing to spend 1 hour at an event instead of all evening might make it more manageable to attend, or bringing a supportive friend along. Really deciding what is the least difficult way for you to approach Christmas this year. And each year you might need to change that plan. So staying open to that idea. Giving yourself permission to not go to places or to go. To change traditions if they're too painful or to hold on to them. making flexible plans ahead of time can lower some of your fear about setting off. And being selfish can be a good way to get through Christmas, giving yourself permission to grieve. Looking after yourself is not being selfish in a bad way. It's considering that you have extra needs to care for yourself just right now. Giving yourself that permission to grieve, but also giving yourself to laugh and have fun if that happens, because that might happen. You might laugh sooner than you think, or in places that you didn't expect. And if that happens, that's okay. Nature can be a relief and a Christmas-free zone if you need a break from all the festive stuff, the relentless festive stuff. The sea, a forest, a local walk. It can give you a break from all things Christmas when you need it. Going for a short walk, somewhere safe, with a charged mobile phone. There's no rights or wrongs in how to get through with this. There's just whatever way works well enough for you for now, for today. And if it feels okay and it's not too raw, there are ways to connect with the person who has died. You could watch a film that they loved or listen to a song that they loved. And there might be days when this is not okay. So don't push yourself. Find small ways that feel doable rather than painful, and be creative to open and finding new ways to connect if it feels helpful. Again, you could donate or volunteer for a charity that they loved, or wear something that reminds you of them. It could be a scarf, a jumper, a watch, aftershave, or perfume. Go to a favourite place of theirs for a walk, or maybe even make a meal or dish that they loved and enjoyed. And if any of this is helpful, great. If it isn't, please don't push it. Don't push yourself. There's enough pushing going on right now. Just file these ideas away for another time in case they might be helpful. So with self-care at Christmas, here's a few ideas. And again, notice what ideas make sense to you and what ideas seem impossible. So ignore the impossible ones, they're not priority, and entertain the possible ones. So keeping plans flexible is really, really important. Saying yes, but knowing that you could leave if it doesn't feel okay. Keeping a basic routine, making sure that you're getting up at the same time, getting to bed at the same time, enough sleep, getting enough water, eating enough food, getting out for a short walk. These things help with the physical element of grief. Limiting alcohol can be important. There's a lot of alcohol around Christmas, and actually that can add an extra stressor to your body that isn't helpful at the moment. Keeping things low key and low stress can be really helpful because there's enough going on with your grief. And it's okay to say to people, no, thank you, if they invite you places. And even if it's a lovely event, it's okay to say, no, thank you. And it's also okay to say, yes, please. And then later on, if you need to leave, giving yourself permission, if you need to leave earlier than expected, that's also okay. And remember, grief brain is real. There can be a loss of memory, just remembering basic stuff. So writing out lots of lists can be helpful. So you're not worrying about stuff that you've forgotten, but you can go and check your lists. And it's also okay to ignore Christmas altogether, to keep it so low key and so low stress that you are basically ignoring Christmas this year. That's fine. Nothing bad will happen. And the balance of alone time and togetherness is really important. Having enough time by yourself to recuperate, but also re-engaging with people so that you're not too much by yourself or too much with people. Going into company and coming away, that's really important. And that it's okay to put yourself first sometimes. And the reality is, Christmas is always probably going to be tougher now than it was before, in ways that it wasn't tough before. And that doesn't mean you can't have moments of joy and happiness over Christmas. It might feel a little bittersweet as well. David Kessler said, it's hard when someone says it's great we're all together for Christmas, and yet the reality is when a loved one dies, we're never all here. So minding yourself well is really important with grief and grieving, and it's especially important over Christmas. So I want to thank everyone for your attention today. And we will have a chance now for questions and answers, maybe even a discussion. And I'll close this presentation and stop the recording. Okay, so we'll just do that now. I'm going to